Welcome to the Diverse Minds podcast, where we give you the tips, tools and techniques you need to be a mentally healthy and inclusive leader. Each week, you'll hear about a variety of topics linked to mental health, well-being and diversity that will enhance both your professional practice and personal well-being. Welcome to the 43rd episode of the Diverse Minds podcast, and today is all about Windrush Day. The first ever Windrush Day was celebrated in 2018 on the 22nd of June. It is a special day to remember the first generation of people from the Caribbean who came over to the UK by invitation to help rebuild Britain after World War II. One of the ships was called Empire Windrush, with around 500 passengers from the Caribbean, and it arrived at Tilbury Docks in Essex on the 21st of June in 1948. And although people were invited by the UK government, when they arrived here to live and work, they were met with hostility, prejudice and racism. To discuss this further, I'm joined by one of the main campaigners that led to Windrush Day, Dr Patrick Vernon. Since 2010, Patrick has been leading the campaign for Windrush Day, and in 2018 kick-started the campaign for an amnesty for the Windrush generation as part of the Windrush scandal, which led to a government U-turn in immigration policy and the resignation of Amber Rudd as Home Secretary. Patrick was awarded an OBE in 2012 for his work in tackling health inequalities for ethnic minority communities in Britain. In 2018, Patrick was awarded an honorary PhD by Wolverhampton University for his work on migration and history equalities. Patrick is a Clare and Winston Churchill Fellow, Fellow at Imperial War Museum and a Fellow of the Royal Historical Society and former Associate Fellow for the Department of History of Medicine at Warwick University. He has over 20 years senior experience working across mental health, public health, heritage and race equality, and is well known in health, local government and the voluntary sector. And finally, he's also the creator of the Every Generation game Windrush Edition, and which has been created to celebrate and commemorate the Windrush generation here in Britain. And the Windrush game allows generations young and old to share the stories of their culture and heritage. So I'm so delighted that you could be with us here today. Welcome to the show, Patrick.
That's great. It's an honor to be on your show, Layla.
No, it's we feel really lucky to have you, because I was saying to Patrick earlier, I've actually followed Patrick in a positive way for many years online on social media, seeing all the amazing work he's done on Windrush and raising awareness about mental health in the Black community. So Patrick, I've done your introduction about your background, you having been a Clare and Winston Churchill Fellow, your campaigns for Windrush Day. But how did you come to become so involved in this work?
I think it's my background. It's because my parents, they came from Jamaica. They arrived in Britain in the 50s. They were part of that Windrush generation, like with many people that came from the Caribbean, Africa, Asia. All part, Britain called and said, "We want your labour," and that's what they did. And I suppose I grew up in the Midlands. I grew up in Wolverhampton, and I've always had an interest in family history, and I've done a bit of research work on my family history on my mother's side and father's side. I've researched my roots from the Midlands to Jamaica and from Jamaica to Africa. So I've always had this interest around family genealogy and culture, identity and belonging. And even though when I went to university, I didn't study, I thought about studying history, but in the end I studied law. And then through my work over the years, working in the voluntary and public sector around mental health services, public health, race equality, housing, etc. The issue of social justice has always been there. I suppose it's always been part of my DNA to try and make a difference in society and community. And so really it's all those kind of influences, family influences, my own personal interest around social justice and equalities, and the work I've done over the years, which has probably shaped me to do all the things I'm doing.
Yeah, thank you, Patrick. And I think our backgrounds do shape us, don't they? They do push us in a particular direction. I think also there is something around past legacies, even though we might not know them, they do come to shape who we are. And I always think that when I watch Who Do You Think We Are? And so what about the public service sector? So you talked about, because I know you've got a background in history of medicine, and then you went on to work in mental health. How did that come about? How did you end up working in those professions?
Well, I studied law, so I did degree in law. I did a master's in law, and then I started working in Birmingham before I moved down to London, and I was working for a community regeneration project around small business development, economic regeneration. Did that for a couple of years, and I moved down to London, where I worked for community service volunteers, where I was involved in a project looking at horticulture and social enterprise. And then from that experience, I then worked from in another regeneration project in East London, which helping people to get back into work, looking at the whole stuff around employment and skills. So this was like in the early 90s, because obviously Britain was still experiencing the fallout of the recession, and this had a big impact on BME communities in East London, particularly in Hackney, Tower Hamlets, Newham, where I was working at the time. And then I worked for a couple of years as a manager of a Citizens Advice Bureau in South London, because I always had an interest in the law. I wasn't quite sure if I wanted to be a lawyer or not. That was always in the back of my mind. And I did do my law side finals in the end, and I passed them, and I realised after doing that, I thought, no, I'm not sure if I want to be a lawyer. I'm more interested in influencing social policy and running services. So I worked for CAB for a couple of years as a manager, and then I got my first major role was I worked for Mind. I was regional director for London and South East England, so I had a responsibility for supporting over 80 local mine associations in terms of in all the London boroughs. My region covered as far as Kent, Sussex, and East Anglia, and so half of my time I was out on the road visiting local mine groups, supporting directors, trustees as well. And at that time when I was working for Mind, it was when the implementation of care in the community was happening. So there was a growth in supported housing projects. There was also an increase in public attitudes in a negative way, sadly, at that time, around mental health. So there were, because it was fueled by a number of factors. One was that when the Conservative government introduced care in the community, there was not enough resources and support and preparing people, that people were coming out of long stay institutions and being ready for back in society. So that led to a whole stuff around NIMBYism. There were lots of local campaigns around planning applications, refusing planning applications for supported housing projects. And so Mind, as a campaign charity at the time, even though my job was operational in the sense of supporting local mine groups, I got involved eventually in some of the national campaigns around the whole issue around discrimination facing people with mental health problems. And there's lots of discrimination at that time in the 90s. People were discriminated if you had a diagnosis, you were discriminated in mental health services. You were discriminated in accessing employment. You were discriminated in getting financial services. People were discriminated in employment in terms of their rights. And then, the Disability Discrimination Act came to force, which obviously helped in some ways, but public attitudes. And that was the same time when the launch of World Mental Health Day was starting, all at the same time. So I was involved in all that stuff. And then I remember the chief exec of Mind at the time said to me, Patrick, I want you to lead this big campaign called Creating and Accepting Communities about how can we have an inquiry to look at the extent of discrimination facing people with mental health problems. So I did that alongside my job as a regional director. Worked with a whole range of key stakeholders, and we launched a report called Creating and Accepting Communities, which was about the extent of discrimination facing people with mental health problems. And in many ways, that report and other work that Mine was doing and other organisations doing, in many ways, was laid the foundation for the work that's been done today by Time for Change. Sue Baker actually was actually working for Mind at the time. I worked closely with Sue. She was head of press So I worked closely with Sue on some of the work that she was doing. And in many ways, that's helped to create. And now, like 20 years on, there was a high degree of acceptance of people with mental health problems. You've got celebrities, politicians, all people coming out and disclosing their mental health problems. And it's taken that long for that growing acceptance. So I played my little bit during that time. And in many ways, that really gave me the experiences of campaigning at a national level, which I used later on in my work, campaign around sort of Black history, race equality and Windrush, basically.
Yeah, thanks, Patrick. And just thinking about today, so I think that's a really helpful journey that you've walked us through, is that you're at the moment, there's set up last week the new alliance of BAME mental health therapists and campaigners in response to COVID-19. So I just think it's quite a good time for you maybe to highlight that. And you were talking about a survey, so if you want people to get involved, I'll put it in the show notes, but it might be a good time to talk about that here.
Yes, no problem at all. So I'm working with a whole network of organisations, Ubele, Batan, BAME Voices, and the whole range of there's about 8 or 9 organisations, unmistakable. And essentially, with COVID-19, obviously we know it's had a disproportionate impact on BAME communities in terms of the death rates, but also it's had an impact on mental health well-being. So from my own personal perspective, my sister's partner, he died of COVID about 2 months ago, just under 2 months ago. So that's had a massive impact on my family, and particularly for my sister and my nephew. And it's really it's struggle even now for the family. We still can't believe that he's dead. We still can't compute that he's passed away, and he's only in his early 50s. And so as a result of that experience and my experiences in being involved in mental health services and campaigning for years, I realised actually there wasn't much stuff around bereavement support for BAME communities. There has always been bereavement services, and obviously you've got organisations like Cruise and other charities, and you've got a whole range of therapists and counsellors who do bereavement support anyway. But in the context of COVID-19 and in the context of a national offer and in the context of the massive, there are thousands of BAME families all around the country who have lost loved ones and co-workers. We're not talking normally in circumstances like this. Obviously, often people die of a whole range of health issues and mobility issues, but because of the rapid nature and the way that COVID's really ravaged the community, it's going to cause a lot of post-traumatic stress and trauma, and that's not taking into account people who are in lockdown situations around social isolation, which further reinforces our experiences of discrimination in society. So we've all got together and we realised that we want to work together to try and see if we could offer a service to the community. So what we've done, we've developed a survey which we sent out, and we are trying to get feedback, not from individuals, by the way, because there are quite a few surveys knocking around about individuals' experiences of COVID, but this is a survey for organisations, because we want to find out whether BAME-led organisations and mainstream organisations, what are you doing, or how are you supporting people with COVID-19 and mental health? Because we believe that there's a massive gap and there's opportunity. But we also recognise that the nature of mental health policy and services over the last 20, 30 years has not really improved fundamentally around recovery rates around BAME communities. And the danger is that COVID-19 will further reinforce the mental health inequalities that we currently experience. And we've got to change that narrative somehow. So we're encouraging people to complete the survey. We'll share the results of the survey, and then hopefully we can build a momentum with people joining us to do two things: to change services, to look at how we get better commissioning, and also, more importantly, how we can provide people service counselling and bereavement support to individuals when they are ready for that. Because after lockdown, especially for those families, when they start to come to terms with the death of their loved ones, and co-workers are trying to come to terms also, that's when people would want that support and counselling. People need it now, to be quite honest, but I think there'll be a massive increase and need in the months to come.
Yeah, I think we're going to see things, because I think, like you said, people are still processing. You know, you yourself said we can't believe that someone in our family has passed away, and I think that's absolutely what's going to happen. And then when people are ready, they need to have, as you said, that culturally sensitive support there, because it is different, and it's different for, you know, if we divide up. We're using the term BAME, but there's a huge plethora of cultures when we talk about BAME, aren't there?
There is. I mean, and I think that's quite important. I mean, because I think, you know, the diversity within. I mean, obviously, people hate the word BAME and all that kind of stuff, and but
it's what we've got, though, isn't it?
You know,
it isn't great.
You know, I mean, but the bottom line is we're diverse people. We're diverse in age, faith, religion, sexuality, lived experiences, etc., migration experiences, and it's making sure one size. I mean, the people say one size. One size fit all model is still strong and pervasive in most services.
Yeah.
And we've lost. And there was a time, I think. So this is the time when I was working for Mind, actually. Around about in the late 1990s, there were more culturally sensitive services and culture appropriate services at that time compared to now.
Isn't that amazing? And it's also really
and there's a fundamental question. Yeah, seriously. And there's a fundamental question: why is it that there was a business case that was made 15, 20 years ago that you need to have culture appropriate services? Right now, it's not as strong as it used to be, and I think this is why I think one of the factors, I'm working with a whole group of organisations, individuals and celebrities, demanding that there should be an independent public inquiry around the COVID deaths and BME communities, because the only way that we're going to find out the truth is to analyse what went wrong. So there's obviously things have gone wrong in terms of the preparation done by the government. We know that's very clear, but also it's about the historical impact. Mm-hmm. And I think what's happened from my experiences of working in this field over the last 25 years in the public sector, voluntary sector, is that there has been a massive cut in public health investment in communities over the last 10, 15 years. And that's, I think, one of the factors, not the only one, but one of the factors which has had an impact on how we have not prepared ourselves for any kind of pandemic situation.
No, and I totally agree with that. And I think those shocking figures that came out, you know, at the end of May around how we have the worst death rate in the world, that's frightening. And yet, you know, I've heard people say, well, we are the founders of public health. So how can it be? How has this happened? You're absolutely right. The cuts, the lack of preparedness. And then, of course, people who are disadvantaged in society because of their race will be disadvantaged even further by this unpreparedness.
Yeah. No, absolutely. And the other thing I forgot to mention is, as a result of the whole bereavement process, it means that because of the social distancing policy, people are not allowed to have the right proper burial and saying goodbye to their loved ones when they've passed away. So I've working with Yabele, we've launched a fund called the Majonzi Fund. Majonzi is a Swahili word meaning grief or deep sorrow. And the idea of that fund is, after lockdown, families and co-workers and community organisations and faith groups would then want to start to properly to acknowledge and commemorate those people who've died in the community as a result of COVID-19. So the idea of this fund is to give out small grants to families, community groups, and commission work to celebrate people's lives. And we've raised about £15,000 in the last 6 weeks, which is on GoFundMe. I hope to raise much more than that. So it'd be really great if people want to make a donation to Majonzi, MAJONZI fund. It's on GoFundMe, and that'd be great to make any contribution, no matter great or small. It's all appreciated.
Thank you, Patrick. And yes, I'll absolutely include those in the show notes as well. So 22nd of June, we've got Windrush Day. Now, many people, because we've been talking about COVID in the news, and it can't be forgotten because people haven't been compensated. The scandal still goes on. So I just wanted to ask you about how it became to be the 22nd of June. How did Windrush Commemoration Day come to be the 22nd of June?
Okay, so in terms of the Empire Windrush ship which docked in Tilbury, it actually arrived on the 21st of June, the night of the 21st of June. But on the 22nd of June, that's when people disembarked from the Empire Windrush ship. There were about over 500 passengers. Majority of them they came from the Caribbean, but also on that ship there were people from Malta, there were people from Poland. It's actually a multicultural ship in many ways, and I've been involved in the campaign for the last 11 years for a National Windrush Day, because the Windrush generation, which my parents are part of, but also more importantly, the migration contribution to Britain, which includes all Beamy families and migrant families since Second World War, has not been fully valued or recognised by this country. Again, going back to COVID-19, the whole hand clap stuff, you clap, it's, as BME staff working at NHS and public services are dying like flies without the proper PPE. It's unlike now that the public are starting to say, frontline workers, we do value you. But we've been doing that work for the last 70 plus years without proper recognition. It's not like now, because we're dying, that we're getting this kind of recognition. So I was aware of that years ago. I mean, I look at my parents, the work that they were doing. My dad was working in manufacturing in the West Midlands, in a very toxic, racist environment, no different to other Beamy families around the country, and it's about that recognition of the contribution in the NHS, in public services, in business, and in public life, and to have a national day to commemorate and to acknowledge the Beamy and the Windrush generation contribution to Britain. And that was the whole idea of that campaign. I did it on the back of a film I made, and then I remember I was approached by the Guardian newspaper to write an article, which I did around about 10 years ago. The article's still online, by the way. And I wrote this article saying that in America we have Martin Luther King Day, we have Labor Day, celebrating multicultural America, etc. What have we got in Britain to celebrate multicultural Britain? We haven't got nothing at all. So that's why we need to have a National Windrush Day. And so I wrote this letter in the article in the Guardian. I got approached by a number of organisations saying, Patrick, that's a fantastic idea. Let's run with this. So I said, yeah, great, let's do that. So over the last several years, we organised events. We've had 2-minute silence outside Windrush Square. We've had early day motions. We've had letters in the Times. We've had a number of online petitions for call for National Windrush Day. But to be quite honest, despite all the lobbying I was doing and campaigning for several years, and people said, it's a nice idea, Patrick, but it won't work, And then we had the Windrush scandal 2 years ago. And with the Windrush scandal, that exposed Britain to the fact that, again, it was not valuing the Windrush generation and their children and the wider issue around immigration, because the hostile environment discriminated against people of colour, all people of colour, but obviously had a more of a disproportionate impact on the Windrush generation and the children, particularly. And so in many ways I was involved in the Windrush scandal, in the sense that because I knew the history of the Windrush generation, and I knew, because at the time when there were lots of articles in the Guardian, particularly written by Amelia Gentleman, who I've got to know quite well as a result of the Windrush scandal, other journalists, they were writing about the scandal in the context of individual cases, but I joined the dots. I saw that all these experiences were linked to the way the impact of the hostile environment and the history of Windrush and migration. So I did a campaign basically calling for amnesty for the Windrush, amnesty for anyone as minors who came to Britain prior to 1973. And that basically was a Windrush campaign with some key demands: end deportation flights, compensation for economic loss and hurt suffered by those people as a result of hostile environment policy, and automatic citizenship status, because those rights were taken away by the government as a result of successive immigration laws and the hostile environment policy. And it just went, and then because of lots of things happening, there was the Commonwealth Head States meeting in London, where a number of Caribbean ambassadors and prime ministers were raising concerns about this. I also worked closely with JCWI Joint Council Welfare for Immigrants and Runnymede Trust, because they were supporting the Caribbean ambassadors, and I worked closely with them around lobbying as well. Then you had the likes of David Lammy, who was chairing the All-Party Committee on Race, where he got a letter signed by a few hundred MPs raising their concerns around the hostile environment. And obviously, but more importantly, it was the individual narratives of the victims who came on TV, were interviewed, who talked about the impacts of the hostile environment on their lives, losing their jobs, losing their pensions, being deported, threatened with deportation, being detained in these detention centres, people being refused entry while visiting on holiday, and more importantly, deaths. So 5 people died in the UK, but many more outside the UK as a result of this government policy. And that forced the government to backtrack and to apologise, because they assumed that the public would not be interested in this, but actually the public was interested. And what happened between April 2018 to June 2018 on social media, particularly on Twitter, Instagram and Facebook, the words Windrush generation, Windrush scandal, hostile environment were trending every single day, just like news coverage that we have now, coronavirus. Every single day, there was a news story about Windrush between the period. And that was the first time ever that the great British public understood why we came to Britain, how we contributed to Britain, and how this government has let down the community. And that was one of the main factors which led to the government acknowledging that needs to be a National Windrush Day. So despite many years of campaigning and lobbying, which went on deaf ears, the scandal ironically helped to make sure that National Windrush Day was now recognised and officially started last year. And the government, on top of that, was giving out grants to community organisations around commemoration events around Windrush Day. So it's not a public holiday. That was my personal objective, but I knew that wouldn't happen, because there've been lots of people arguing for public holidays, for a whole range of historical dates and occasions. But the National Windrush Day is good, and we need to build on that, to be quite honest.
Yeah, thanks so much, Patrick, for explaining that all. And, I don't think there's been enough compensation, and I keep reading stories about how people haven't been compensated. And then I've seen things about COVID and how, again, the Windrush generation have suffered. So what else can be done? I mean, how can people get involved in the campaign, and what else needs to be done for people to be seen, heard, recognised and compensated?
So, there's two things, the Windrush scandal and there's the Windrush Day. So the Windrush scandal is ongoing. As I said before, I've been heavily involved in the scandal. The government they've talked about righting the wrongs, and the wrongs have not been written. People have not been fully compensated. And there's a massive backlog of cases. I was lobbying, again, I've done various petitions on this, and I've been lobbying MPs and peers that the Home Office should not be managing the compensation scheme, because number one, they haven't shown any degree of empathy or sensitivity, even now, despite the scandal, towards people. If you speak to some of the victims or survivors of the scandal and their experiences of trying to go through the process to get compensation, they've almost been treated like benefit scroungers. That is the mentality and attitude of the Home Office. And so, therefore, I believe that it should be managed by another government department or arm's length agency, because there's a conflict of interest, because the Home Office is still implementing the hostile environment, they're still doing deportation flights, and yet they're meant to be empathetic and supportive. It doesn't work. Does not work. So we need to campaign for the compensation scheme to be managed elsewhere. But ultimately, we need to end the hostile environment. It's still existing, and as you know, we've got the immigration bill going now, which further tightens and restricts the mobility of people to travel, and it further enshrines the hostile environment policy, which discriminates against all people of colour. And we need to stop that. We need to fight for that. That's the ultimate campaign still, which a lot of campaigners and migrant charities and organisations and lawyers are still fighting as well.
Thank you, Patrick. So it's about keeping aware, joining these organisations, seeing what petitions are available, writing to our MPs, writing to our councillors.
Right for everyone, and also the lessons learnt review. So one of the things that the government did as a result of the scandal, they commissioned Wendy Williams, a senior kind of civil servant, who did a review of the Home Office over the last 10, 12 years and its policies around a hostile environment. She made 30 recommendations. Those recommendations need to be actually implemented by the government, and actually then we need to have an independent oversight from the Home Office to make sure they're fully implemented. It's not good the Home Office implementing these recommendations. It's like marking their own homework. Then we need to have more independence again. So again, it's about how there needs to be greater transparency and public accountability, which is very similar to the whole COVID-19 situation. We want answers, we want accountability and transparency. Things can't be done through certain private meetings and certain conversations, and where it's where the community is not invited or involved.
Yeah. And if people want to get involved in Windrush Day and celebrate the contributions of the Windrush generation and migrants, what could we do, given that we are in, to keep ourselves safe? We shouldn't really be having street parties, I don't think. I'd love to have a street party and celebrate people, but given we are where we are this year, what are the ways in which we can celebrate and commemorate people?
Well, quite a few people are actually organising online events. So I'm going to be involved in a couple of these online events. So during Windrush Week, beginning 22nd of June, there's going to be quite a few events. Hackney Council are organising an online Windrush event. First of all, I know that there's a community organisation in Sussex doing so. I think there's going to be quite a few events online. People will be showing film clips online. There'll be Zoom talks online. I'm planning to organise an event on the 24th of June to explore the history of the Windrush ship, because I'm launching a campaign with others that we should try and retrieve some aspects of the Windrush ship as part of British history, because the ship itself is at the bottom of the Mediterranean Sea, and we want to get the anchors from the ship. So I'm working on to organise a consultation event in June, so people can have a conversation about that. So there'll be lots of things online, to be quite honest, that will be taking place during Windrush Week.
And are you going to ask people to take any photos? Maybe people are going to do some cooking. Is there like a hashtag that people can use to do this, to show their celebrations at home?
Well, sure, yeah. I mean, people can hashtag Windrush Day 2020 or Windrush Day, Windrush Generation, celebrating migrant contribution. So yeah, so whatever people want to do as well, I think that's important. And also because of what's happened with COVID-19, a lot of the Windrush generation, and as you know, a lot of migrant communities have died as a result of COVID-19, and so we have to acknowledge that actually it's a bit of a mixture. It's not quite a celebration. I wouldn't use the word celebration, because we're still fighting for justice for the Windrush generation around scandal. People from the Windrush generation and migrant communities have died because of COVID-19. And so I think it's an opportunity for this country to really reflect on our contribution and value us much more. Clapping on a Thursday evening doesn't do it anymore.
Yeah, no, I understand that. And you're right, and I don't mean to be glib about it, but I just wonder whether you had any thoughts about, I appreciate that it's more about reflection than celebration, but if there are things that people wanted to do, a kind of sensitive, appropriate way to do that.
Yeah, I mean, the government have given out grants to a number of community groups and local authorities, so I think they'll be organising, there'll be quite a few online events which people are currently organising for Windrush Day as well. So the other thing that I've done is I've launched a schools competition to support Windrush Day, Black History Month, which is about, it's linked to a book that's coming out in September that I'm working with a colleague of mine, Dr Angelina Osborne, called 100 Great Black Britons. And so again, it's using that opportunity for young people and for schools to learn about Windrush and migration history, because unfortunately Windrush and migration history is not part of the national curriculum, so we need more work to do on that for the future. Yeah,
absolutely, and I hope it will go back on the curriculum. I hope it will be on the curriculum, because like you said, it is British history. And if so, people want to know more about you and your work, Patrick, and they want to follow you like I have done for many years. How would you suggest they do that? And I'll include all your contact details in the show notes.
Sure. So people can go onto my website, my personal website, which is patrickvernon.org.uk. You'll see all my activities, what I'm up to, articles I've written, the campaigns I'm involved in, and stuff like that. I'm on Twitter, so Patrick Vernon or PP Vernon. On Twitter, I'm on LinkedIn, Instagram, and Facebook. So I'm on all the main social media platforms. And if people want to get hold of me, they can go onto my website and they can email me via the website as well.
Brilliant. And any last sort of quote or anything that you want to share with listeners before we finish today? So a quote, a poem, a phrase, a saying, anything at all before we finish?
Oh, good question. A quote or I suppose the only thing just to say is that I think the COVID-19 Windrush scandal and also Grenfell, of all these circumstances, all these issues over the last 5 years highlight why we need to fight and campaign for social justice and race equality. And there's anyone who's listened to this podcast have a passion for change, get involved. Don't just watch it on the news or tweet about it. If you feel passionately in terms of your community, where you live, your community of interests, just get involved.
Thank you so much. I think that's such a lovely note to end the show on. So everyone, there's lots of amazing ideas for how you can get involved, how you can find out more. If you don't know enough and you want to educate yourself, do have a look up for online events. Patrick shared his details. And so I want to wish everyone a very reflective and also, a different kind of celebratory week for Windrush Day and Windrush Week. And I'll catch you on the next episode where we'll be talking more about mental health and inclusion. Thank you, Patrick.
No problem at all. Thank you, Layla.
Thanks for listening to the Diverse Minds podcast. Don't forget to subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you access your podcasts from. You can also connect with me on Facebook, Twitter, and LinkedIn. Tune into next week's episode of the podcast, where I'll bring you more insights on mental health and inclusion. Bye for now.